All right, fellas, here we go. Number 79 in the 1970s, Genesis Foxtrot. It's ranked number 10 in 1972 and 305 of all time, and sadly, it is not in the list for Rolling Stone.
Are any Genesis albums?
No.
Okay.
No Genesis albums made it into Rolling Stone's list, so we can throw that issue out there.
Imagine that when they make it more filled with women and a more diverse audience, Genesis becomes a little bit less interesting.
There was no women. There's no women at their shows either. When you go see Musical Box,
that was kind of my joke, Matt. You didn't have to explain it. You could have just let it sit there and process. But no,
I was just remembering because every time I go to the show, I'm like 20 years younger than everybody else, and it's just like old dudes. But hey, anyway.
So anyway, in case you were wondering about my joke, old white people like prog rock. Continue, Matt. White dudes.
They do, yes. All right, so Genesis, the little history on the band, they were formed in 1967. The members all met at a Charterhouse School, which is a public boarding school in the UK. The initial members included Peter Gabriel on vocals, Tony Banks on keyboards, Mike Rutherford on bass, Anthony Phillips on guitar, and Chris Stewart on drums. Can
I bring something up real quick, Matt?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt your flow. That seems to be something that happens quite a bit with British bands, doesn't it? Like meeting in Charterhouse or school. Like David Bowie went to the same school that like Peter Frampton's dad, right, ran. What other bands?
McCartney,
the Beatles,
McCartney
right?
and Harrison
the
went to
Beatles.
school. Yeah.
I feel like the Who, there were multiple members that met in school, if I remember.
Pink Floyd.
I think like Entwistle,
Pink Floyd might have been college. I don't know if they were college or... But yes, you're right, John. That is the thing.
Go for it.
I don't know.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's just
you're
thing,
right.
I guess.
No, yeah. So the members actually were split between two bands. So they started off in separate bands, but when those bands broke up, the five of them got together, started recording some demos, and they actually got a former Charterhouse student by the name of Jonathan King to help produce their songs. King was actually just getting started in the music business, and he already had written a relatively popular hit. And so he really liked the band. He helped them get signed to Decca Records, and he actually came up with the band's name as an homage to the beginning of his producing career. So had nothing to do with the band. It was all about him. He actually and he encouraged the band to put out shorter, poppier songs, kind of along the lines of the Bee Gees. King was a big Bee Gees fan, and if you guys know early Bee Gees, it's not Saturday Night Fever stuff at all. No. It's like very slower, very tuneful pop, melodic, short songs that the Bee Gees were doing. So King kind of pushed them in that direction.
Can I come up with Fleetwood Mac was similar that way? They're like a different band altogether at the beginning than they were later. Yep. Yeah. And then, am I hearing correctly that he encouraged them to make short, tightly constructed pops? Am I hearing this correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I just wanted to make sure I heard.
Yeah.
Short, tightly constructed pop songs.
So that's where he was going, and so shortly after they got together with Jonathan King, drummer Chris Stewart leaves the band to focus on his studies, and he's replaced by their second drummer, John Silver. And then they record their first album that's called From Genesis to Revelation, and it was released in March of 1969. It sold poorly, probably for a couple of reasons, but one of the main ones was that when the album was sent to stores, the managers, after seeing the title of the record, felt that it should be put in the religious section, so they put it in with the religious music, and it didn't sell very well. So it did hit its peak. It finally did hit its peak in 1974 in the U.S., and charted at number 170.
Can you imagine the religious music people that bought that album and listened to it?
Yeah, that was not. I mean, it is very different. If you ever listen to it, it's on Spotify. The production's not very good, and it's very different than the stuff that we're hearing now.
My favorite thing is that it is filled with shorter songs, but it still goes 1 hour and 7 minutes. So I do feel
well, there's a lot of them.
Yes.
Is that one of those
21
things,
to be exact.
Is that one of those things too? I wonder if that's one of those things where they added on like bonus cuts and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because a lot of albums weren't that long that were released at that time. But
they did. Looks like it's only 13 tracks, and then they added 8 bonus tracks, which look like it adds about 30 minutes of that length. So in fairness, his
happens
vision
a lot.
was met at 40 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that album, From Genesis to Revelation, does not sell well. The band splits from Decca and King, and they kind of broke up a little bit from each other, but they did get back together. Their second drummer, John Silver, leaves. He's replaced by their third drummer, John Mayhew, and they start touring in late 1969. Their first live show was a teenager's birthday party, and then they start shopping.
There's more Johns in this band than there are in a whorehouse.
And they start shopping around for labels until members of a band called Rare Bird, who was a band that Genesis had opened for, recommended Genesis to Charisma Records, who ends up signing them and gets them a management and record deal. Which then they begin their second album, Trespass, which includes longer songs. So this is where they start to depart from their earlier shorter song set that Jonathan King was pushing them towards. It did sell better than the first, but still wasn't a hit. It was panned by Rolling Stone. Peter Gabriel considers leaving, and then founding member Anthony Phillips, guitar player, quits the band due to health concerns and growing stage fright. And so this is it was a big change for the band. Phillips leaving was a big blow. They almost broke up, but they did decide to move forward. They also said they wanted a better drummer that was going to match their skills at their instruments. So they fired their third drummer, Mayhew, and they started holding auditions for guitarists and for drummers. Fun fact: Queen's drummer Roger Taylor did try out, he turned down an invitation to audition with the band.
Do you guys feel like prog rock bands go through more band?
I was going to say the same thing, Josh. Yeah. It makes Rush amazing because they kept this three-piece the entire time, but they are so the exception to that rule, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So but that's kind of the end. Genesis went through a lot of their band changes in the very beginning. Okay. So we're about to get the classic, what is known as the classic lineup of the band.
It depends on your Genesis taste, though, Matt, doesn't it?
The classic lineup. Well, no, because there's still the same people.
Classic in terms of time frame, right, as opposed to music.
Yes, and this iteration. Yeah, you're right, because there's plenty of people that like later Genesis than would not want anything to do with the early stuff. But anyway.
And vice versa.
That's correct,
a good essential question topic for down the road. Best band reinventions.
That is a good question. All right.
And worst.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So they put an ad in Melody Maker, which was responded to by a drummer from Flaming Youth, the band Flaming Youth, another band I've never heard of. Mm-hmm. This guy's name is Phil Collins. They were struck by his confidence, his humor, his singing ability, which was an added bonus because nobody else in the band could really sing other than Peter Gabriel. And they hire Phil Collins in August of 1970. And then they continue to play a bunch of shows without a guitarist for a couple months. They pick up a guy by the name of Mick Barnard, but he only lasts a few months. And finally, they hire on Steve Hackett, who was a guitarist that Steve Hackett put out an ad for himself saying that he was interested in receptive musicians determined to drive beyond existing stagnant music forms. So he fit right in with these guys.
I love any story of people finding a member of the band through like a want ad or a thing in like Melody Maker or just like I love any of those stories. So
I think it's even more interesting when it's just like Steve Hackett is putting out I'm looking for a band, right, as opposed to a band looking for a musician. Like I think the way that you do that is kind of interesting to me because So they released their third album named Nursery Crime in November 1971, which was certainly improvement on their sound. Hackett was a more aggressive guitar player, and Tony Banks was using King Crimson's Mellotron in that, so they're starting to branch out even more into the prog rock stuff. Steve Hackett's actually known for being one of the first musicians to incorporate the tapping technique on guitar, which probably was made most famous by someone like Eddie Van Halen. So he started using that on that record. It sells better than Trespass. They start to become big in Europe, particularly in Italy and Belgium, and they're touring more. Peter Gabriel's getting weirder now because he gets really into the theatrical elements of the band, and he puts on these costumes. He shaves his head. He shaves in the very front of his head. He shaves like a triangle shape, so he's got long flowing hair, but in the very front part of his head there's just a bunch of missing hair in the shape of like a triangle. So while they are touring for Nursery Crime, they start to mess around with some material on stage, which would become the beginning works that they would use on this album, Foxtrot. They go back to the studio. They work with a couple of producers who don't really work out, and they finally settle on a guy by the name of Dave Hitchcock and John Burns as the engineer. And John Burns also worked with bands such as Jethro Tull, as well as Jimmy Cliff and Toots and the Maytals, artists that we covered before in CTS. So this is the record that they come out with. Just one quick thing on the cover of the album. This represents the third and final album that the band had commissioned artist Paul Whitehead to do the artwork for. He wanted to. The cover here was inspired by the Apocalypse section of Supper's Ready, which is one of the last parts of the last track on the album. And he wanted to present the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but the band members actually this was their least favorite of his album covers. But a lot of that, they felt it was just too jumbled and too much stuff was going on. He also actually came up for the name Foxtrot, which was inspired by American slang for attractive women and Jimi Hendrix's Foxy Lady. All right, so there you go. History of little Genesis Foxtrot. I think everybody knows how I feel about this, but I am interested. I'm going to start with John on this. I'm curious to hear what you think about Foxtrot, John.
Yeah, this week is funny because it's like we're doing 1972 and 1973, and I've come to a realization, guys. 72 and 73 is a period of time in which musicians are at their most ambitious, sometimes in great ways, sometimes in bad ways, and sometimes both in the same album or the same period, right? So I think to some degree it's a reaction. It's also becoming clear that things like punk and new wave were clear, and metal, right, were clear reactions to this type of music, right? Mm-hmm. So the Foxtrot album I liked as a whole, but it vacillated between stuff that I liked and stuff that was just excessive. I will say that without Supper's Ready, I think the album would be stronger for me. I think Supper's Ready was just too much at the end of this as a piece. But I like how this sounds sonically. This has a lot of the things I like in prog rock in terms of songs being pieced together, and like you can analyze the song as various pieces, which is something that I like of prog rock in general. The musicianship is really strong here. I know Matt mentioned the tapping, and I actually heard that and was surprised a little bit of the tapping sound because I'm familiar with Banks's guitar, right? And Hackett's guitar, but I don't think I ever really picked up on it as much as I did in this album. Now, with that being said, of the classic period of Genesis, this is probably the album of theirs I've listened to the least. So as a result, it was fresher to me. All in all, though, I like the album. You know, Peter Gabriel's voice is really interesting, kind of washes over you after a while. But then right when it blends in, he can do tricks with his voice that get you back into it. Here, I feel like he's still kind of finding peak Peter Gabriel at this point. You know, he's trying out different stuff. From what you said about him experimenting with personas, it seems like he's also experimenting a little bit with what he wants to sound like sonically and vocally as well. In my opinion, it works better on something like Get 'Em Out by Friday than it does on some of the Watcher of the Skies too, you know, as sonically is a great way to start the album. But all in all, like the album, like many prog rock albums, I think you can always find 10 to 12 minutes to shave off a prog rock album. But with that being said, it wouldn't be prog rock without that, because part of what makes prog rock is the fact that you're getting all of these different flavors of ice cream, so to speak, and some of them you're going to like and some of them you're not. And for the most part, I like the flavors they were giving me. Now, I can get more into the specifics down the road, but I'm curious what Josh is going to think, because I know his take on prog rock historically. I'll be interested to see if this transcends it or just falls in line with it.
Yeah, I didn't know any Genesis prior to Phil Collins.
Those were not albums of mine that you went and got burned and you burned from my collection, were they, Josh? No.
I don't think they were even on my radar realistically. But I'm mildly positive on this album. I really liked I feel like this is a very accessible album, and I think it's probably one of the stronger prog rock albums we've listened to. I feel like the song structures are very not linear, but understandable, and you can follow along pretty well. And I didn't pay attention to the lyrics too much on this album this listen, although the one song was about eviction, clearly, and which is
Get 'Em Out by Friday.
Get 'Em Out by Friday, yeah. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that it's Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel. I think that I can recognize that I'm in good hands with them, and their talent is clear when listening to this Genesis album. I like both of their voices, as solo artists, and hearing them together in a younger iteration is kind of like refreshing, and it reminds me that these guys are good and they have talent. So it's not something that's like clearly out of the blue in the way that King Crimson or Moody Blues or Jethro Tull were when listening to it. I feel like in addition to that, I can hear kind of what they took from this band into their solo records, right? I like Watcher in the Skies. That almost could be like a solo Phil Collins song in some way, or a solo Genesis, Phil Collins song. And I feel like I can hear elements of what Peter Gabriel's into in this when he becomes the solo artist that he does. So that made it easier to digest also. Watcher in the Skies was my standout song. That was my favorite song by far, and I think that is just a really good song and would be something that Josh. I would listen to, on its own, not listening to this album. And it seems like, I think, kind of similar to what John said, as the album goes on, I feel like it starts strong, and then by the time it gets to Supper, I'm kind of worn out a little bit by it. And even though Horizons is only about 1:40 and it's instrumental track, it's just a lot to digest, Supper. And it's clearly like it's got multiple sections, like many of the prog rock albums that we've listened to, and
a lot of organ. A lot of organ.
But I liked some of the organ in the other songs, and I think is there Mellotron on this as well?
Oh, that's the very first notes. That's big time Mellotron. Yep.
Yeah, and I like the nature of that as well. It seemed like a lot of these songs are also characterized, and I think this is with prog rock also in general, that it's kind of a staccato nature of like stop start, quick stop, or like into the chorus really quickly. There's no like kind of slow build. You're going along, and then it's like bam, you're right into it, and I feel like that's apparent on this album as well. I did like the harmonizing also on Timetable. I think they have a little bit of harmonizing in there. I think the use of flute is interesting on this album, and not overdone. It's not like prominent like Jethro Tull or anything, and Peter Gabriel plays the flute. I think I saw when I was looking at that. So I think they're incorporating different instrumentation in an interesting way, and not like making it the sole focus of the song. I still get slight like medieval music notes and tones at times throughout this album, which kind of makes it hard for me to take it seriously, but it's very light and scattered throughout. I just kind of hear it, and then it goes away and into something else. Were you gonna?
Can I ask a question, Matt?
Yeah.
So, and I could be totally off the track because I did no research on this album, but I know one of the things that like prog rock people love to do is when there's a long song, like the different pieces, right? Each of them represent something sometimes. And so when I saw Supper's Ready, the first time I listened to it, I said, all right, I'm going to go back the second time I listen, and I'm going to see how many distinct parts there are. And I counted 7. Is there a theme there, or is it just 7 pieces and we piece them together?
There are 7 pieces, and they're all listed on they're all listed on Wikipedia, which it comes from the original liner notes, and those song the titles of each of those parts some of them are very interesting.
So it is like, so that's every freaking prog rock band does that.
Like subtitles.
Yep, and you can also see if like Supper's on the Wikipedia page for Supper's Ready. It'll show you all
right
the times. It'll show you all the timestamps as well.
Oh, okay.
But most of those songs are basically a hodgepodge of individual songs that they just blended together.
Okay.
So that's mainly what that all is.
Okay.
So it wasn't like, hey, let's write Supper's Ready like this. It was like, let's take this song. Peter Gabriel's got a song here. Tony Banks has this. Rutherford's got, now let's put it all together. And, so the creative part was actually, and I think Phil Collins had a big part in this. One of his biggest contributions to that song was the bridging of the different pieces together.
Okay.
I'm going to guess where Josh heard the medieval stuff is. Ichnaton and Itzikon and their band of merry men. That seems like it would be where some of that medieval theme comes in. So I
heard a little bit about that in Get 'Em Out by Friday as well. I think it's sprinkled throughout. Overall, I like this album. I think it helps also that we've listened to so much prog rock at this point, and it doesn't seem like as big a jump listening to this. I think this would be a good place to start with prog rock, actually, if you were trying to get into it. I'm interested to see kind of their progression as a band also after this album. Do we listen to more Genesis?
We got 2 more.
Okay, so yeah, that's good.
Including a rock opera, Josh.
Yeah. Oh, great. I love rock operas. What else do I have?
Stay tuned for segment 3.
Yeah. Supper, some of the stuff sounded like Yes also, like the roundabout piano or organ or whatever it was.
Yep.
And sometimes I forget that Phil Collins is British, so when he sings more British and like on purpose in this album, and like kind of.
Does he seem countryless or American, Josh? Is that why you say that? Does he seem like an American dude, or just that he doesn't come from anywhere besides Phil Collinsville?
Yeah, I think I just thought of him as an American when I was younger, and not knowing.
Okay.
So I just had that association. But yeah, this is a good. I guess it's overall. I'm positive on it because it's not like so. Like John likes to say, it's not like math, right? This is a pretty accessible, listenable album, especially Watcher and the Skies, and I like Timetable too. And so yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, well, this was my introduction to prog rock, and this is where I started with Genesis. And I agree. I think that this is much easier to get into than something like Yes or some of the other prog stuff or Jethro Tull even. Yeah. This to me is a much more it's more focused, right? Even though you have a song like Supper's Ready, which is kind of all over the place, but even within that, the transitions totally make sense, right? There's nothing that's just kind of stands out as being like, well, that doesn't sound right. There might be some parts of that song that shock you, particularly when they go into that, what is it? It's towards the end, Apocalypse in 9/8, which is just that really driving, really off, like the weird off beats that are going there because it's 9 beats in a measure. And nobody ever freaking does that. So that's why it takes you, if you just listen to that song once or twice, just try to tap your hand or foot to that beat. And you're not, there's no way you're going to be able to do it. 9/8.
What's the 9/8? Jesus. Yeah, so 9/8. Right. So, and actually, that.
And I saw on this was another thing on that Wikipedia page. So it's 9 beats to the bar, expressed as 3 and 2 and 4. So it's 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3, and it's like, and it took me forever. I remember I was trying to air drum it when I was in high school, try to figure it out. And I'm like, this is impossible. Nobody does this. This is insane.
It's not intuitive to drumming
at all.
A 9/8 signature. Yeah, I mean that's. Ridiculous.
Yeah. So I agree that overall, even with a song like Supper's Ready, but even with Supper's Ready, it comes back, right? It starts off with the opening part is called Lover's Leap, and you get that at the end. The last part which is called As Sure as Eggs is Eggs, which whatever, I don't know what that means, but there's parts of the original of Lover's Leap that kind of comes into that, and it comes full circle.
I also am called the lyrics guy here, but I had no concept of anything that Peter Gabriel was singing. I couldn't get an idea of what is there thematically, Matt, or is it just the words?
To me the words just exist. I mean, not really. I mean, there's some you can go on there and look at, what does this mean? You can kind of pick up on some things, but as a cohesive song, it's not like, this tells this gigantic story or whatever. It's just kind of, it's just a cool sounding song, So but yeah, it's more accessible. I mean, I have to disagree with John. I think Supper's Ready makes this album. I mean, that song, and I get it. It's long, but there's a lot going on. But that's a song that's like, it's one of those things, and I've talked about this before. You gotta let it sit with you. You gotta see where it built. You gotta know the song kind of inside and out to really appreciate it. At least I did. This is not something you're going to get on one or two listens. No freaking way. And if that's not something you want to invest the time in, I certainly get that. But as someone who's listened to this album a ridiculous amount of times, that song is. I'm going to go out and say I think this is the best prog rock song of all time. This song is fantastic. Whoa. It's got all the elements of a fantastic prog rock song. It's fast. It rocks out. It does the finger tapping thing that John was talking about. There's some heavier parts to it. That Apocalypse, a 9/8, and it goes into the end part where Peter Gabriel's voice is just so good. It's this, he's like borderline screaming, and it just it sounds so good. And then there's the beautiful flute solo that leads into that. It's just like this really quiet flute part that's just beautifully done with Hackett's classical guitar in the background, and it just builds up a little bit with the drums, and then it just shoots you right through with that dun dun dun, and it's like, it's awesome. It's like it's a perfect song in many ways for me anyway when you're looking at prog rock. So I get it.
It sounds like you like the build to it. In that,
totally.
In that song as well.
Yeah. There's absolutely there's build to it. And they remastered this several years ago, and they did a much better job. So when I got the remastered version, when they kicked into that Apocalypse in 9/8, when I heard it on that version, I was like, oh man, it's such a fuller sound. It's a much more clear, fuller sound. So I mean, that makes this album, that brings it over the top. I love the other songs as well, particularly Can Utility and the Coastliners has always been like a favorite track of mine. There's some really cool parts of that song as well. Get 'Em Out by Friday is more of a that's the second longest song at 8:36 or whatever, and there's the beginning of Watcher of the Skies, and that's usually when I see the musical box, that Recreation Band, they usually open with that, and that's like a song that all the members of the band are wearing white, and there's a black light behind them, so it's like this weird lighting that they have, and then Peter Gabriel walks out like in total dark cape with bat wings coming out of the side of his head and like these glow in the dark eyes, and he just looks so creepy and so cool, and every time I see them it's loud when you see it live, and it's like sends chills through my bones. But I love it. I love Genesis. This to me is, I see what you're saying, Josh, and I do agree, this is a much easier place to start with than something like Yes is way more. Yes is a harder listen. It's harder to find the grooves. It's harder to find out what they're doing. It seems more chaotic to me. This is a more focused type sound.
That's what I like about Yes, the chaotic. I think Yes better than I like Genesis.
And I think that's something I would need to sit with more. But again, I like the melodies. I like and you're getting, there's a lot of melodic stuff going on here. There's some weird stuff, and you have to take Gabriel's lyrics with a grain of salt, because I do know these lyrics, and they're just really weird, and they are that medieval thing.
But all prog rock lyrics kind of to some degree suck, don't they? Like we've done Yes, Aqua Lung was like a loose concept, right? I mean, Rush, you have to get through a whole bunch of like Ayn Rand bullshit, you know what I mean, to get to like the stuff that they do well, so it's I don't really go to prog rock for my deep lyricism.
Yeah, the only thing that seems to make sense on this lyrically is Get 'Em Out by Friday, I mean, Watcher of the Skies is supposed to be like an alien comes down and he's just looking at Earth from the sky, It's like and judging like what he's seeing or whatever.
A common theme in the early 70s I found in the music we've covered, isn't it? Space, it leaks into funk music, right? It leaks into Bowie, it leaks into prog rock. I mean, everybody's writing about space.
And it didn't stop in the lyrics of the songs. If you ever like look at those old videos of like Gabriel like talking to the crowd and like introducing the songs, his banter is just ridiculous. He just says a bunch. He tells like a story that makes no sense. It's just really weird, and you're like, what kind of drugs was Peter Gabriel on? But I don't think he was on drugs. Actually, no, there was a line in here about like some of the lines from one of the songs here was inspired by Peter Gabriel's wife kind of seeing a ghost or something like that and having like a weird experience or whatever. And Steve Hackett later on was like, Yeah, I think they were all just really high on acid or something like that. I don't think she's, it was legit, a sighting. She was all hopped up on something. But I love it. I love Genesis. I've listened to this plenty of times. I would say if Supper's Ready, if you have the patience, if you are interested in very different time signatures and how different pieces of music can flow together, giving Supper's Ready some time is well worth it. And it took me a while, but when I got there, I was like, oh, this is it. And and I've seen them play this live, that Free Creation band, and it's crazy that they can keep those beats. And Phil Collins drumming is fantastic. I mean, that's the thing that kind of gets lost in it. Phil Collins is known for In the Air Tonight and Susudio and all that stuff, but Phil Collins was a no joke, phenomenal drummer and a great singer too, I would have to say. And so it's crazy that he's a big part of all of this, and then he goes off and does Billy, Don't Lose My Number. You know what I mean? It's about
like Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl had basically the same career, 30 years later.
Yes, he did. This is way more drastic, though. I mean, you're going as much as art rock as you can get to as poppy as you can get.
Sure.
But
grunge to friendly Dave Grohl is a pretty significant shift.
It's rock and roll. I mean, it's a heavier, sludgier rock and roll to a poppier rock and roll.
Would Kurt Cobain write Times Like These?
No. Oh, Dave, talk about a guy that doesn't. Okay. I know that Dave Grohl's lyrics are not good at all.
Okay, but just wondering. Okay, so yes, it's sonically, yes, for sure. I hear what you're saying, but it's similar enough that you have to at least draw parallels.
Sure. Yeah.
It doesn't. I guess one final thought I have is it doesn't feel like they're trying to cram everything into a song like some of the other prog rock bands are. I don't know if I'm off base there, but it seems like they're more intentional with their creation of the music. Maybe
a lot of these songs, like Watcher of the Skies, Get 'Em Out by Friday, they are in timetable. They're staying pretty much in the same lane. They're deviating somewhat, but the main the main melody or the kind of is permeates the song, right? It's not jumping all over the place. It's doing different things. Certainly, the Watch, it's different when you got the Mellotron going and then they're building different things in, but throughout the song it's basically the same kind of thing that's happening. With the exception of Supper's Ready. And as opposed to Yes, it's it is, like I said, chaotic is a better word to put that. So big thumbs up for me. I'm surprised. I was like, I saw my brother today, and he was like, "What do you think John and Josh are going to say?" I'm like, "I think John's going to like parts of it. He's not going to care too much for the lyrics." And I said, "I bet you Josh isn't going to like it." So Josh kind of surprised me here.
Proved you wrong.
You did.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way about this. I feel with most prog rock that it leans a lot into stuff that I like, but it gets indulgent, and that's what I mean. It's like. Prog rock is to indulgent what hair metal is to, boutique guitar solos. You know what I mean? It's kind of, it's one and the same.
I mean, but when you guys hear something, because I have to ask this, when you hear something like that Apocalypse in 9/8, which is so different than anything that you might have ever heard, does that make you go, holy crap, that's awesome? Or is that just what's your reaction when you hear that?
There are parts of Supper's Ready that I really liked, but it's just, it strains my listening stamina to listen to something I feel that there's great writers who could use an editor, and I feel sometimes when you get to a certain point the editor should come in and go, let's go to 16 minutes, you know what I mean, as opposed to 21
instead of 23.
And I mean, but that, like I said, it's with that being said, it wouldn't be as interesting to those that love prog rock, and it wouldn't give you the bits and pieces I like too. So maybe the genius has to come from the genius and the excess have to exist in the same world, right? And that's kind of what you deal with sometimes with prog rock. It's rare that you get something like what is Roundabout, 9 minutes, that's nearly the perfect length and just gets out of there before it becomes too indulgent. Or 2112 by Rush. There's a couple that it's they managed to nail it pretty much, the exact right amount without it getting past the point where it overstays its welcome. But you're right, Matt. There were moments of brilliance all over this album. I will say though, and I agree with Josh here, that I think Watcher of the Skies is by far the standout of this though. It's the most focused track. It's from start to finish. I like it, and it's a great way to start off the album.
It's also the song that Fish played when they were inducted into Genesis was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah. So I was like, "Holy crap! Trey Anastasio inducted Genesis into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame."
Nice.
Yep.
When did they? Did you say when they got inducted?
I didn't know. We'll cover them. We'll come a couple more times, but I don't remember. It was probably like 15 years ago or 10, 15 years ago, something like that. But I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Gotcha.